Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. Some books have unforgettable titles. The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick. The Obscene Bird of Night. What others do you know? Just put them in the comments so we can have fun with this idea. Here's another one for you. The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner by Alan Sillitoe. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you. The reason I arrived at this book was good old Iron Maiden. That's why I'm wearing this t-shirt. Also, you can find the song titled The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner in their album Somewhere in Time, which I encourage you to give a listen to. So after that, after I decided to read this book a long time ago, thanks to Iron Maiden, the next thing that I heard about it was that it was considered to be a kind of a British Catcher in the Rye. That's the way that many people described it. And as most comparisons, this one is simplistic, of course, and it's also very reductive, but I think it's a good way to start. You know, to me, that was exactly what I wanted to hear because I was a huge fan, and I don't know why I'm speaking in the past here. Maybe that's a topic for another video, but I was a huge fan of The Catcher in the Rye, so I was like, British Catcher in the Rye? That sounds good to me, so let's check it out. So what do you say? Let's explore this great book right here, and we are going to start with context and contents of this little book, because The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner is a collection of short stories that was published in the year 1959. The book contains 9 short stories, including, of course, the one of the title. And yes, even though the title story is rather longish, especially for a short story, we're looking at 48 pages in length, it is a good old short story, okay? It's not a novella, as much as it hurts me to admit that. But no, we are dealing with a short story, and the stories that you find in this collection, they all revolve around characters that we could describe as outcasts, as misfits, as people who find themselves alone against the world, if you will. That's one way that I would describe them. That's one of the reasons I assume why it was compared to The Catcher in the Rye. But as I said before, you know, let's take that just as a starting point. So our approach with this video is going to be, you know, a little different than what I usually do, because the title story is by far the most famous. So we are going to focus on that one. Okay. At the same time, I do want to do justice to the book, and there are several great stories here. It's not just the title story. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about those stories, and I also want to tell you which ones were my favorites, so that you know where to start if you decide to check out this collection. So let's start looking at The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, the short story, which is the one that opens the collection, as a matter of fact. So our protagonist in this story is also our narrator, and he is a young man by the name of Smith. Okay, of course, the choice of last name here is quite revealing and quite obvious. It's a very popular last name, and something that is also very deliberate is the idea of leaving the first name of the character out. So we don't really know his first name. That's very important because he has been divested of his name in a way, and his last name is one that he shares with many people. So Smith is a 17-year-old young man who is in Borstal, that is a home for juvenile delinquents. He happens to be very good at running. The tone of the narration, since we mentioned the idea that he is both narrator and protagonist, is very informal, very straightforward, very direct, and it also has a lot of that good old sarcastic humor. So for that reason, especially for the sarcasm, he reminded me a little bit of Alex from A Clockwork Orange. So I wonder if there was some kind of maybe an influence on Alex from this Smith character that we have here. Now let me read you the opening sentences of this short story, because they are rather famous, and I think they really do a lot when it comes to like setting the tone, of course, but also telling us what kind of narrator we have here, as opposed to me telling you what the narrator is like. As soon as I got to Borstal, they made me a long-distance cross-country runner. I suppose they thought I was just the build for it because I was long and skinny for my age, and still am. And in any case, I didn't mind it much, to tell you the truth, because running had always been made much of in our family, especially running away from the police. I've always been a good runner, quick and with a big stride as well, the only trouble being that no matter how fast I run, and I did a very fair lick, even though I do say so myself, it didn't stop me getting caught by the cops after that bakery job. So We have here a story that is basically, on the one hand we have the authorities, and then on the other hand we have Smith. So the Borstal authorities, what they want is for Smith to win a long distance running cup for them, so that it can add to the prestige of the institution. And Smith happens to enjoy running because of the sense of freedom that it gives him, but also because while he runs, he likes to think. And that is his secret right here. He says that sometimes I win because I am not thinking about racing itself. I think about other things, and I forget that I'm running. And that's kind of like his little system. So what we have here is a split, right? On the one hand, we have running as something that is good in itself, so that would be Smith. And then on the other, we have running as a means to an end, which is the view of the authorities who want this cup that represents their success as an institution. So Smith's dilemma is basically whether to play ball or not, whether to allow himself to be turned into an instrument or not by the authorities who want this cup so desperately and see him exactly as an instrument to that type of success. So looking at structure, right, and a little bit at contents, as I told you before, this is a 48-page long short story, and the narration is divided into 3 parts. So I want to tell you a little bit about each one of those parts. I think the first part is really kind of like a philosophical introduction to our character, and it also reflects, of course, his worldview, his experience also, and the general idea that you get from the very start, and because he himself says it very explicitly, is an us versus them kind of situation, the outlaws versus the in-laws. And of course here, in-law, not in the sense of mother-in-law or sister-in-law, but the people who are inside of the law, you know, and the ones who are outside. Now, in part 2, he tells us how it was that he got to Borstal in the first place. So we jump back a little bit in time, and he tells us about that bakery that he robbed with one of his friends. And we learn a lot about him, and also in the process about his family. His father is out of the picture, and his mother comes across as rather frivolous or impulsive. And then we get to part 3, which takes us back to the present time, where we see Smith running for this cup that the authorities want him to win. So it's a nice, really, you know, a nice jump in time when it comes to telling us this story. What we have here at the center is running as metaphor. Okay, I want to read you a brief passage. I'm jumping a little bit when I read this, but if you have an edition that is similar to mine, at least, you're going to find this on page 43. I couldn't see anybody, and I knew what the loneliness of the long-distance runner running across country felt like, realizing that as far as I was concerned, this feeling was the only honesty and realness there was in the world, and I, knowing it, would be no different ever, no matter what I felt at odd times, no matter what anybody else tried to tell me. It was hard to understand, and all I knew was that you had to run, 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 without knowing why you were running. But on you went, through fields you didn't understand, and into woods that made you afraid, over hills without knowing you'd been up and down, and shooting across streams that would have cut the heart out of you had you fallen into them. You should think about nobody and go your own way. Not on a course marked out for you by people holding mugs of water and bottles of iodine in case you fall and cut yourself so that they can pick you up, even if you want to stay where you are, and get you moving again. To conform or not to conform? That is the question here. Do we live for ourselves or do we live for others? This is a very complex issue that many of us encounter at many times in our lives. So it's something that really resonates with anybody, whether you have been a runner or not. I myself am not very good at running. You know, I can't really run much, especially now. But when we think of this running as a metaphor, right, one thing that may come to our minds first is, of course, this idea of freedom, right? The freedom that you feel when you're running and feeling the wind, you know, against your face and all that. But there's also that concept that we have to consider of the rat race, right? This idea of us running to pursue that goal that is just unreachable, that continues to elude us, right? It's just like kind of like that donkey with that carrot in front of his face and that kind of thing. So there is a really, really rich metaphor that we have here because you can consider it either way. And I wanted to say a little bit about the ending of the story without spoiling it for you. Towards the end, we see how Smith continues to run, And he thinks once again about his family, so we hear more important details. It's a very interesting way of telling the story, because at first we hear some details about the family and we just kind of leave it there, but then in the end those details take on a different meaning. So it's like, wow, you know, you have one of those moments where you hear, oh, okay, so that's what happened. And we are also told, of course, at the ending of the story, because this is a short story, maybe if it had been a novella, it would have been different. But we are told of Smith's decision. Is he going to win this cup for them or not? But there's a nice little touch at the end that tells us also how it is that we are reading this story. How is it that this story ended up becoming a written text? Was this written by Smith himself or by a different character? So I thought that was a really, really nice touch at the end to include that little information about that. There is, as you know, probably, a film adaptation of The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, which I have right here. And as a matter of fact, it was because I found this at the library that I decided to reread the collection of stories in the first place. So I guess we have this movie to thank. I had seen it, of course, a long time ago, but I decided to rewatch it. It was released in 1962, directed by Tony Richardson, and starring Tom Courtenay in his debut as a feature film actor. So we have really, you know, good names right here. Obviously, because this is a short story originally, a lot has been added to it, but I'm going to tell you, I really like the bits that were added because they are in keeping with the original material, the source material, and also with the whole philosophy of this text. I really liked the parts where the guys, you know, Smith and his friend, they go out with girls. So I thought that was interesting, adding this little bit of, I don't want to call it romance, but let's call it romance, okay, for the sake of, for lack of a better term, or maybe it really is romance, you know, and I'm being just a little bit cynical here, but I'll let you decide that for yourself. And I really loved the shot. It's a famous shot, okay, where you can actually see in the same shot the moon and the sun both at the same time. This is something that happened by coincidence, if you believe in such a thing. And at that moment, you know, when we have that shot, we see Smith, or Colin, as he is called in the movie. They gave him a name, so that makes a little bit of a difference right there, running as a very small figure there in the horizon. So I thought that was really, really nice. And another thing that stood out to me, I'm just going like free form here, you know, not giving you a lot of details. This is not an in-depth analysis of the film, not even close. But there's a scene where you see the guys at Borstal singing Jerusalem, and it's a montage. As they sing that song, you can see people being imprisoned and basically mistreated and things like that. So I thought that was a very interesting way to do that. That says a lot about, you know, the approach, the aesthetics, and even the philosophy behind this story. The details are all there. For example, the part where they watch TV with the volume down, so the silent TV, and they have a few laughs, that is there. The little scene with the drain pipe, so it's all there and very well translated into cinematic language. So I would say if you like films like A Taste of Honey, like If, you know, it's a very, very good film. Also, some people compare it to Guess, one of my favorite movies too. So if you like that kind of film, that kind of atmosphere, that kind of, you know, ambiance in terms of film, then I think you will enjoy also The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, even if you do not decide to read the text for some reason. So let me tell you briefly now about the other stories, as I promised before. The collection begins, of course, with The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. After that, we have Uncle Ernest. This one is about a lonely veteran who develops a kind of bond with two girls until society intervenes. So it's about that, you know, in a sense, cynicism dichotomy. And because of that, it reminded me of that movie Sunday Sensible by Serge Bourguignon. Great film, by the way. I rewatched it recently and I highly recommend it to you. So it's that kind of an idea. Mr. Rayner and the School Teacher is about a lonely, jaded, bored school teacher who looks at girls who work at a shop right from his classroom, where he deals with like unruly students. And we hear in particular about one girl that made a big impression on him. After that, we have the fishing boat picture. That is one of my favorites, and I think this is the saddest story in the collection. It's about a failed marriage. Okay, so this couple have separated, and the wife all of a sudden comes back and she asks her ex-husband if she can have a certain picture that they used to have on the wall. She wants to keep that. There's just a lot of pathos to this story. It reminded me of Dostoevsky, so this was one of my favorites, along of course with the title story. Noah's Ark is the one that follows, and I'm gonna be honest, this one didn't quite reach me. Okay, actually the back cover description mentions this story, and this pretty much covers it as far as I'm concerned. It says, in Noah's Ark, a boy who plays a con game at an amusement park gets taken for a spin himself. So, I mean, there's a lot of an exploration of that childhood friendship kind of thing, so I do appreciate that, but I don't know, it's just not enough to hold my interest, really, and it seemed rather flat to me. It's not a very long story, so we do have also to say that. On Saturday Afternoon is about a boy who learns a very important lesson when he witnesses a man trying to hang himself. This one is really quick, it's straightforward, it's also one of the most well-known of the collection, and I thought there was a kind of a bit of a dark humor to it, so I thought it was a very interesting blend, if you look at it that way. Then we have The Match, and in this one, it's just a very simple story in which two friends go to a football match. I mean football, soccer. Yeah, let me say that also in US English to avoid confusion. So their team loses. And the story is basically about how those men, each one differently, deal with that defeat when they get back home. Okay, so I don't know, it didn't really speak to me a lot, but it's just a great example of the kind of realism that Alan Sillitoe can achieve. Now, after that, we have the last two stories, and these two were also among my favorites, okay? We have The Disgrace of Jim Scarfdale, and this is an Oedipal kind of story because we have an overprotective mother and the son who all of a sudden says one day, announces that he is about to get married. So you can imagine the situation right there. It's just very well narrated because we also have a narrator who is an observer, okay, in the story. It's not a completely omniscient third-person narrator, and it's not the protagonist, but somebody who is observing the protagonist from a distance. So I found it to be engrossing, and it's definitely one of the best. And then the last one that we have is The Decline and Fall of Frankie Buller. This is one of the most endearing of this collection of stories because it's a nostalgic type of story about a man named Alan. Okay, so we may have here an autobiographical element who is looking back on his childhood days. And the whole story revolves around the figure of Frankie Buller, the person of the title, who is a guy in his 20s who leads a gang of 10-year-olds in the neighborhood. Okay, he's a kind of a Don Quixote type of figure. You know, it's all in good fun. When you say gang, it sounds like something serious and awful, you know, but no, it's not like that. You know, it's just a 20-year-old guy, 20-something, who hangs out with 10-year-olds and kind of organizes them to fight with the 10-year-olds of the other neighborhood or something like that. So it's really interesting, and what I liked about it is that here in this last story we get a more sophisticated narrator. There's kind of like a higher vocabulary because this is a grown man who eventually became a writer, just like Alan Sillitoe, looking back on his experiences of childhood. So it gives you that added perspective. I was thinking, for example, you know, Salinger in Seymour: An Introduction. It's not the same thing as The Catcher in the Rye. You have a different kind of approach, a different kind of vocabulary and narration. So that's the kind of difference that I am talking about here. So that is the whole collection. I told you at least a little bit about these stories. And the bottom line is that I really, really enjoyed coming back to this collection after so many years. It was a collection that made a big impression on me back when I was in college. And even though the title story remains my favorite, I had kind of an added appreciation of those other stories that I mentioned to you. And I was thinking, you know, speaking of the impact that it had on me back then, back in the day, maybe 2 or 3 years after I read the story when I was in college, I actually wrote a collection of short stories. And I can tell there were 13 stories. I did that on purpose. I like the number 13. And I can tell you that at least 2 of them bear the influence of Alan Sillitoe. So I think this affected me and reached me in ways that I didn't really understand at that point, because I had read it before I wrote that. But then, you know, looking back now, I realize that the influence is definitely there. This is an author that I really want to explore more, because here's the thing, he was very, very prolific. Okay, I think most people know The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, and maybe, you know, because there was a film also, a very famous one, Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, which is probably the next one that I'm going to read by him, because it's kind of like the next obvious step. But he has lots of books. So I think this is an author that really deserves a little bit more of our attention, and I'm definitely going to make a point of reading more by him. And when I do, I'll definitely tell you about that. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes, relationship advice, anything that you have? You know that I'm always happy to hear it. And please let me know about those interesting titles that you know of, so that we can hear some more. Those are my 2 cents on The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner by Alan Sillitoe, a wonderful collection of stories that I urge you to check out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.